And good day, wherever you may be joining us from. Welcome to another edition of the Digital Download, which is the longest running weekly business talk show on LinkedIn Live. Now globally syndicated on the IPGN radio network. Today, we're navigating the waters of uncharted leadership and setting a course to discover a pirate's guide to strategic leadership. Okay, I think that's enough piratey talk for today.
Keep it going.
If I could. We have a special guest today, Dr. Don Thomas, to help us with our discussion. With a bachelor's in engineering, a master's in education, and a doctorate in strategic leadership, where he focused on generational communication, and his dissertation was about communication in a multi-generational remote team. A real Renaissance man. But before we bring Don on, let's go around the set and introduce everyone. While we're doing that, why don't you in the audience reach out to a friend, ping them, and have them join us? We strive to make the digital download an interactive experience, so audience participation is highly encouraged. Okay, with that, Adam, would you kick us off, please?
I'd love to. Before I do, though, why are pirates called pirates?
Oh, gosh.
I don't know.
Why are pirates called pirates?
Because they are.
All righty. Yep. It's going to be one of those days. That's great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adam Gray, co-founder of DLA Ignite, and very excited to be here because some years ago, Tim and I were at a talk given by Sam Aland-Corneith, and he wrote a book called Be More Pirate, and it encouraged me to actually go and explore a little bit about pirates. What a fantastic bunch of people they were. So very, very exciting to hear about all of this piratey stuff.
Excellent. Well, we're glad to have you here. Bertrand, welcome.
Thank you, Rob. Hi, everyone. I am the French on the call, so don't know whether I'm the pirate, but I'm definitely the French on the call. I'm running a company called Odysseus & Co., and we specialize here in Europe on social selling.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. Thank you. Captain Blackbeard. Good morning, Alex.
Yeah, I'm trying to get into the theme. So
then you need the eye patch and the parrot on your shoulder.
Yeah. Okay. So hello, everybody. Thank you, Adam, for kicking us off with a dad joke. I've got another one for you. So why can't the pirates fire their weapons on Saturdays?
I don't know. Why can't the pirates fire their weapons on Saturdays?
They only can on Sundays. They only can
on Sundays. Yeah. All right.
Okay. All right.
Thank you for that, Captain Blackbeard.
Yeah, good point.
Before you introduce yourself, Andrew Slessor says, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Andrew.
He follows that up with, Alex should not be Captain Grayish Beard. Should that not be Captain Grayish Beard?
Yeah. Thanks.
Shots fired. Alex, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm the bearded sales guy, Alex Abbott, the founder of Sapiro, otherwise known as the bearded sales guy, or Captain Grayish Beard now.
Excellent. Thank you. Glad to have you here. And myself, I am Rob Durant, also known as Rob. I am the founder of Flywheel Results, a proud DLA Ignite partner. All right. As I said, this week on the Digital Download, we'll speak with Dr. Don Thomas, author of the book, A Pirate's Guide to Strategic Leadership. His work promotes a blend of creativity, courage, and flair in leadership, advocating for adaptive and democratic organizational structures inspired by historical pirates. Let's bring them on. Don, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. I didn't expect so piratey of a welcome, but fantastic. I appreciate that. All in theme.
Absolutely. Don, why don't you please tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here?
Absolutely. I always like to start with kind of a one-liner to describe me. I'm kind of one part strategic communicator, one part technologist with a sprinkling of pirate thrown in just to keep it all balanced. So I've actually been in the technical realm for about 35 years. I'm the guy that remembers things that nobody else remembers. Punch cards, assembly language, well, things that people are scared of nowadays. So with that, I actually began the idea and a journey that I liked the idea of the old school Renaissance man. It sounded really cool when I was in high school and college. You know, a little bit of art, a little bit of science, you know, kind of be the life of the party per se. So that's where the background in education and engineering and strategic leadership. Now, as I went through that, I think my background is I fell in love with pirates. I was a pirate from, a young person on up, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And I can dive into that as we go further too. But from my perspective, I do a lot of writing and speaking because I truly feel that we've taken this whole generation, what we call the golden age of piracy, 1600s, 1700s, who had fantastic ideas in business, not so much about killing competition, but that's a different story, but more about how we can learn from them. So, that's something I would love to talk about and take your take on it as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Tim is joining us.
Sorry, I'm late.
Tim, welcome. No worries.
You'll have to
Would
walk
you take
plank now, Tim.
Yeah. Tim, would you take a moment to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. Sorry, I'm late. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I won't take up any more time. I'll sit back and be quiet.
No worries at all. So, Don, let's jump right into it. I want to start with a foundational question.
Go for it.
What does a pirate know about strategic leadership?
Ooh, excellent question. I think many times we look at pirates as maybe a little too cutthroat, maybe a little bit too dubious in morals, but they actually know quite a bit when you do the research. From a strategic perspective, I think pirates had it right. If you think about it, 1600s, 1700s, people were generally not happy. They were hungry. They were locked down in certain positions they didn't want to do, and they felt helpless. So many of these individuals started pirating. So although, like I said, killing people didn't work as well, although cutthroat in today's modern time doesn't quite translate the same way. But when we look at it, they had a few things right that we kind of forgot about for hundreds of years. First of all, they were adaptive in leadership strategically. They had to be able to have strategies based upon weather conditions, the strength of the enemy, opportunities of what to plunder, where to plunder, as well as they were very democratic. I was very interested in this type of research. We always see, movies and such, captain is the leader and will kick you off the ship, walk the plank. Not really historically. Historically, contrary to popular belief, pirate crews elected democratically most of their captains. And they actually had the ability to remove them as well. So it's a very democratic organization. If you were a bad leader, we'll go to the next leader. So that really made leaders, being captains, be more strategic in nature. They had to be fair in compensation. You didn't just get on a ship because you wanted to eat bad food. You wanted to have plunder. Same thing while we joined certain things. Talk to people that started Google. They're the same way. They wanted to plunder the internet, and they did quite a good job at it. They're also great at branding. Oh my goodness. We talk about branding today. They did it hundreds of years ago. Think of the Jolly Roger. The different flags. They had images of fearlessness and different ruthlessness. And they're often flying these to give that feeling from a strategic perspective, we are the best of what we do. I mean, you've got those kind of strategies. They are very resilient. They did risk management, believe it or not. That sounds like a new topic, risk management, but no, they've been doing risk management for hundreds of years. You know, they were, what's the best way to navigate through storms and battles and uncertainties? We risked, we had analyzed. They did this all on the fly without a single computer. So I think the last thing I'll say about that is that they were very innovative. They were also global networkers. Just because you wanted something doesn't mean you could get it. You had to network with different people, different organizations. I want to plunder the ship. I want to grab this. They had all the characteristics that eventually led me to call myself a pirate entrepreneur. And so I adopted a lot of that and put that into a strategic perspective of how can we do better as leaders, taking some of these old time concepts that really aren't that old.
Wow. So let's dig into that a little bit.
You bet.
What can we learn from a pirate regarding strategic planning? What did they do that we could maybe do better?
So, and that actually asks a question right before that. There's actually two types of global leadership when you think about it. You have operational leadership, the day-to-day, how do we get things done? You know, how do we make products? Then we have strategic leadership. So strategic leadership more looks at how do we do things in the future properly, 1, 3, 5 years, we would say nowadays, so that our operations don't go bad. And that's usually what kills an organization. So successful pirates, Edward Teach, Blackbeard, you know, what they would do is that they would actually have groups of organizations that would scout out competition strategically. They would look for who they are. They would look for opportunities, not just today, but what they're going to do in 6 months, as well as how do they build those networking relationships to ensure that occurred. So they started doing that type of strategy, not worrying about today. They had great people, theoretically, if you think pirates are great, on their ships doing the day-to-day, but they were planning out what that future looked like to be more successful using that type of strategy.
All right.
I remember reading about pirate, and one of the things that I was so impressed about was that in a time when people were very straightforward and simple in their view of things, pirates embraced the idea of same-sex marriage. They embraced the idea of insurance for people. So if you were injured, then you would get a payment from every additional plunder if you were injured on the job. Pensions and the opportunity to retire. This is hundreds of years before the rest of society adopted this kind of thinking. Remarkable, really.
Correct. I mean, and that's the challenge. We had this, like I said, there were some flaws. You know, we're looking a few hundred years back, and that's fine. We get better as we go forward. But they had some novel concepts that people really squashed. You know, we had many of the Royal Navy and so forth just really removing all of that. And then we started again under a society of we know what's best for you versus we really want you to do whatever you want as long as it doesn't affect me negatively. So, I mean, I think they had some great ideas to follow on that. And, you know, we're now catching back up. That's the odd thing. Hundreds of years later, it's like, we just thought of something really great. It's like, no, they thought about it a long time ago.
You mentioned risk analysis. So what can we learn from pirates about risk analysis?
So as you probably know, there were probably hundreds of different pirate ships out there. They came, they went, and then the ones that stay in our mind, you know, like we talked about, you know, Blackbeard and a few others, they got there not just because of their ruthlessness, but they actually worked in strategic councils. And I think that's the first thing I take from looking from a strategy perspective. We're not an island, believe it or not, with the pirate pun or not. That many of these had strategic councils. They came together, they worked to be better. That's what made them from a strategic perspective. They learned, they were not beneath themselves, or they were not over anyone. They weren't beneath learning from another pirate as well. So I think that's what one thing we take away from this. In today's world now, many times we look at it as I've got to do it on my own, or I need to perhaps step on other people to move my way up. wasn't really the pirate way. The pirate way was, how do we make it good for everyone? But to get there, I need to work with others. So strategically, we would look at shipping channels. We would look at maybe new technology. There are also early adopters of technology, believe it or not. You know, in the naval realm, new technologies would come up. We think about them as like, oh, that's old school. But new things would come up. Pirates would gravitate them first, and they would be strategic. And they would also do risk taking to say, is this something that'll work? Is this something that we can plunder with? Is this something we can take into the ship out with? So they did those types of risk assessments, and then they worked with teams to say, what are you seeing? So I think that's the takeaway from that, is successful pirates always worked with other pirates, that no pirate was an island, no ship was an island. And that's what we should really embrace in our world today.
Listening to you talk there, Don, it's amazing. I'd never really seen pirates through this lens, this actually very positive lens that we can learn a lot from. There's so many negative connotations attached to the word pirate. So how much of your time do you spend convincing others that it's a positive?
At first, probably 50% of the time, because we do have some great movies, some of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies that make pirates a little less than realistic. But then we have, historically, people have misspoke about pirates. And don't get me wrong, they were morally dubious, shall we say, most of the time. But every generation is. We look at, I'm a Gen Xer. I look at, Gen Z, and they think, what in the world is this guy thinking? We are grown, and we've become part of the society we work with. And so that's the first part, is explain. I always start out kind of funny, working with that and just explaining that they were the first entrepreneurs that I can historically document that went out there, took the risk, were successful. But then again, like most entrepreneurs, either you succeed or you're shot down or bought out, So nowadays, I probably spend 10%, 15% of the time trying to convince people that pirates, it's like, take 5 minutes, let's talk about them for a minute as a historical group. I think it's kind of funny. I'll just add this little axiom in. I always tell people, especially if they're drinking somewhere, it's like, well, you do realize pirates made sure that what you're drinking is accurate, right? They proofed it. The proof concept comes from pirates. The reason, because they got tired of drinking watered down whiskey and brandy, which, by the way, were the primary spirits of pirates until the 1700s and became rum. But what they did was they added gunpowder into a mix of rum. And if it still ignited, it was proof that it was at least 57% alcohol. And so that's where that term proof comes from historically. And so we can thank pirates for having good drinks.
Strong drinks, at least.
Yes.
So I'm glad you brought up Gen X and Gen Z, because I know that you are, you know a lot more than just pirate lore. What can you tell us about multi-generational communication?
Oh, my favorite, and what most people want to talk about, because it's so mysterious to some, but so critical. So nowadays, it's very interesting the time we live in. We actually have 5 different generations working in the business space right now, from our traditionalists down to Gen Z. Gen Alpha is coming soon. And how we identify our generations really helps us do business better. Because what we do is we put them in categories, not based upon, it's 2 decades or whatever. It's based upon the idea of what influenced who they are. So if you look at me, I'm a Gen Xer. That means I was born between 1965 and 1976 or so. My generation is based upon the idea of what happened around us. We saw the Berlin Wall fall. We saw, the Gulf War. We are independent. We were the first generation to have the largest divorce rate from our parents, mainly because we were latchkey kids. Both of our parents were working, so we had to take care of ourselves, build independence into what we did, as well as, if you think about it, we are the generation that have 1 foot on each side of technology. I remember a corded phone. Not everyone does, but I also remember a cell phone as big as my arm. So we broached that particular technology, which made us strong in business, as well as the ability to work with others. It builds our communication. So each generation has a communication preference, what they're looking for in life. Like me, my communication preference for most Gen Xers is email. But you go back to boomers, a little differently. Traditionalists hate technology. So what I do is I teach people and organizations how to work with all these great generations, because they all have great pieces of value. But if you don't communicate properly, or you don't look at what their expectations are from a cultural perspective, or how do we reach a particular generation maybe in a remote environment, we usually don't do as well. We can only be as successful as bringing all these teams together. And so that's what I do a lot, is talk about how to reach these people, what makes them unique, what makes them a differentiator. I guess to some degree, I'm a multi-generational whisperer.
You say each generation has a communications preference. Why don't they just follow mine? Mine's the best.
And what is that preference?
I really don't know, honestly. I can tell you it's not texting.
He still texts everybody, Don.
Oh, I try not to text everyone. That's more of a Gen Z millennial kind of communication. Of course,
Rob is a millennial. Did you not know that?
You're very kind, Tim. Thank you.
Maybe Gen Alpha, 2010, 2012. But yeah, we divide these up into what happened to everybody, and they're not static. At one time we thought Gen Z was 2001 going forward. Then we shifted them back, from us geeky kind of people that look at this to 1997, because you based upon what goes on in the world. We had to add in some criteria that made them unique, the towers and everything falling. So we had to do that. Well, Gen Alpha, the brand new one hitting the marketplace, we used to think they were 2012. We bumped them back a little bit to 2010, because that's when the first iPad came out. And that's when we kind of see a delighting point between being truly born into technology.
So my background is a lot of training and development. Each generation having their communications preference. When you pointed out to me, I go, oh yeah, that's obvious, but I don't think of that at first.
Mm-hmm.
I am curious about the implications of training and development across generations. Now, again, recognizing that they have their communications preference, both in terms of how I'm delivering anything I might be training and what I'm delivering in terms of training. How do you help the multi-generation training and development aspect of communication?
Excellent question. I actually have to dig into my other backgrounds as well, because I have a background in education. And so that is the first part of this, understanding how people learn. Most people don't realize that everybody learns at a different style. Most people, 90% of all people start out as visual learners. As guys and gals, we're young, we're toddlers, we visually learn. Young ladies generally start changing, toward teenage years, they might be more, instead of visual, they might be more tactile. That's why we see people go into different sports. They become more auditory learners. And that's the first thing I always tell people, is really understand your audience if you can. And many of that would just based upon generations. And after that, I usually look at a group, and it's one of those, you scan the room in business to see who's around. And so it's always important. And I keep a checklist handy, and I always give it out to people that here's what to look for. Don't just look at age. Age means a lot, but culture, you have to look at. You have on maybe here on the vertical side, you've got kind of a generational cohort. Across here, you have a cultural designation, and you can find out really quick on their learning style. So if I have a bunch of guys, we're in our 30s, I'm probably not going to do a lot of PowerPoint slides, just because that's not what they're going to be learning from. They're going to learn a different way. I'm a tactile learner, so I like to do things with my hands. And, I'll do exercises with people to help them understand how they learn best. And then I take that information and apply it to the cohorts as well, knowing where they're coming from. And a lot of it's just missing guess, kind of hunt and peck, missing guess sometimes.
So we joke about the younger generation not wanting to use the phone. And while it's easy to joke about, what do they have to teach us about communication?
What I love about our Gen Zs and some millennials, it frustrated me at first because I'm an email kind of guy. I believe I should be able to write a 3-page email and get my entire point across. But what they have taught me, even through myself, is that communications really is about being effective and efficient. And so I have 2 daughters who are Gen Z. One's on the cusp of Gen Z and one's kind of in the middle of Gen Z. And what I've learned from them is that they love to text and they love emoticons. So I've had to learn how to take, 10 lines of information and put it into one symbol. And I think that's what they teach us, is that we can be effective and efficient as long as we have the codex to be able to translate what that means. And there are a lot of people that go kicking and screaming saying, I refuse to do that. But the reality is that's where we're going. And so suck it up and learn that new language.
Sort of like hieroglyphics.
Yep. You have to have that Rosetta Stone to translate it there. It's like, what does the crying smiley face mean? I don't know.
Maybe that's your next book. What Egyptians can teach us about communications.
One of the things done that come to my mind right now is so you talked about earlier about different types of leadership and the short term and more the midterm. I'm just thinking, I do also have 3 kids, and their relationship to time is very different than mine. And I was just wondering, is there room for them in the strategic space?
There is, but there needs to be a modification. What I have learned from my own children and their friends and everybody else is that time does march on, but they could care less most of the time. And I'm a very timely person. I show up at meetings 5 minutes early. I feel that early is on time and on time is late. And so there is an issue a little bit that there seems to be no hurry in understanding how time fits, as well as many of the younger generation don't understand why maybe sometimes they are treated poorly, or maybe you show up 5 minutes late to an interview. Why didn't you get that job? So they're more about the experience than the actual function of it. And what we learned from that is that we need to be able to live in that moment without being so rigid. But we also have to come back to where we are, and there are rules of society we have to fall within. And I think I try to teach that to my children and other children, that I understand. It's like my youngest daughter. She absolutely, for any gift, or she wants an experience. She doesn't want something. She wants an experience. We want to go somewhere. We want to do something. I can agree with that 100%. And that really goes across a lot of the younger generations. But it's the understanding of that has to fit into the rest of the world. And I think that's from a strategy perspective. When I work with large groups of younger, maybe early 20s, conceptually, they're always on their phone. They have no skills communicating face to face because they will chat next to the person next to them on the phone and not say a word to them. It drives me insane. So you have to kind of bring them out a little bit and, doing those types of exercises of how do we get you interacting strategically with other people? And, that's really where their challenge is right now. So that's kind of how I look at that.
When we first met, you said to me, I truly believe communication is where projects either die or they're successful.
Right.
How can I make sure my project is successful?
I always tell people, if I had a superhero ability, what that would be is the ability to translate business to technical and technical back to business, because those translations are where almost every project will succeed or fail, because you set expectations based upon business saying, I want this, and maybe it could be technology, it could be marketing, whatever, and they're understanding something different. So to be successful, you have to be sure you're using the same communication methodology. And that's where this whole multi-generational cohort communication comes from. because if I'm working with my social media team, much younger than me, but I've also learned how to communicate and verify. It's always trust but verify for me. I trust you know what I said, but let me verify what you said. And
I don't mean to interrupt, but
Yeah.
isn't that a very Gen X statement?
Yeah, it is. Proud to be a Gen Xer.
There you go.
So those are really where it comes down to is you're absolutely 100% correct. I live and die by that idea of I hate the idea we have to translate nowadays. It used to be translation wasn't necessary. But today there is a need to have that codex, that Rosetta Stone in the middle to ensure it. And I think people that don't do that don't re-verify, are the ones that usually end up failing. I work a lot in technology, which happens all the time. Business wants X, and you write all the specifics down and so forth. Technology says, I know what that means. It's like, do you really know what that means? And so it takes that intermediary person many times to come in the middle and look, let's make sure we all believe the same thing. And that leads to a lot of success usually.
You brought up social media, and we've got 5 generations in the workplace. Does that mean we also have 5 generations on social media platforms?
Not 5. I can tell you now, the traditionalists, our oldest generation, most of them, well, I may have lied. A lot of them may be on Facebook occasionally, grandchildren and so forth, but they're not really active social media people. It's really from, I think, maybe about 3, well, if we count Gen Alpha, 4 generations, because they're the 6th one popping up there, are on there. And I believe, I'll be honest with you, I'll get on Twitter and I'll have my standard, cohorts there. I was like, I understand what you're saying. And then I'll get, feeds in. It's like, what the heck are you saying? So I do think that we have somehow invisibly made a different channel, not that we've defined it as a channel, for certain generational groups. And it is a challenge because I do know that, for many people, social media is the Bible for everything that's true. I talk to my children. But many times it's how do we do that translation? And I'm still struggling with that, to be honest with you. I'm not perfect at it. I do see multiple issues there that I'm trying to figure out how to resolve.
So you brought that to exactly where I was hoping to go. We've got, we'll call it 4 generations on social media. It would seem we're using the same platform. We'd understand each other perfectly well.
Right.
But that's not the reality of it. So how do we fix that?
That's an excellent question. And I don't know that we can fix it quickly because it's not a platform issue, as you said. We can create 12 more platforms and we're going to have 4 different variations to those platforms. Something needs to change from a society perspective when we're talking about these cohorts, and we need to have a common language. We just don't have that common language yet. And I think that's well worth the effort to determine where some commonality can fall in. I mean, I kind of see it as a Venn diagram, that we have all these different groups out there, but we need to have some commonality in the center. And that doesn't exist, or at least the Venn overlap is very small. The key is to expand that. And I don't have a great answer to that yet, but next time we talk, I will.
All right. Sounds good.
How would the pirates manage that, you think? Social media.
Well, the great thing is that everybody was democratic on a ship. So the person scrubbing the deck has as much of a vote on how things work as the captain did. And many times it was rule of majority. If we were going to do something, it would be the majority rules, and the people that weren't part of the majority understood that. And to some degree, I feel that maybe even how social media needs to be, majority rule, this is where we are, and we're all happy with it. We can have some outliers and maybe edge cases, but really it's the majority of how it's going to work. That how it historically works on a pirate ship. And at the same time, if you're just a pain, you might get kicked over and walk the plank as well, because you weren't someone we wanted to keep employing.
So when you talk about multi-generational communications, what are some tips that you give for those in the workplace? And the follow-on question, would those map over to social media platforms?
So great question. So from the business perspective, when I talk to leaders that are pulling out their hair, not understanding why, because we have such a weird, in my opinion, business life ever since COVID, with the sheer amount of remote work and some on site, some not on site. You travel sometimes. I used to travel 80% of the time before COVID, and now it's down to almost nothing. And it used to be that we all got to see each other. And I'm a big believer that when we see each other, we work much better when we are physically in the presence of others. But that's hard. So when I talk to leaders, I talk about finding out understanding generically what cohort they're in. And not that that's going to answer everything, but that gives you a starting point. If I'm working with a millennial, it's good to know. After that, we start looking at and asking them and talking to them of saying, what is important to you? Because culturally, I can tell you, let's go to the millennials. Culturally, they have a feeling that they would like to be doing a greater purpose. So that greater purpose doesn't mean making money. They're really less money motivated. Gen Z are even worse than that. But they want to know that they're doing something socially responsible. So when you start putting those pieces together, you're able to work with them and say, what is the value proposition of you working here? What is it that's going to make you, I'm going to use the air quotes here, happy to work here, and that I can make you more successful? It's really that type of attitude that begins the journey for that. Because many times it is like pulling teeth to get Gen Z on a call that's not on your cell phone. Zoom calls or anything are out of the choice most of the time. They're somewhere else. So you have to understand that aspect of what culturally they're looking for, what motivates them. Usually not money. Money works. But for them, not so much. So it's doing that. Like I said, I usually give out a blueprint that says, here are all the generations that we have here. Here is historically what they like and what they don't like. That's just as important. But then after that, you need to build that relationship now that you understand the blueprint, go forth and make it real. And so that's been very successful working with leaders and walking them through those step-by-step processes.
How much of the work that you do, Don, is about creating that narrative with leaders for their organization versus giving the organization the freedom to communicate in their own style?
Most of the times when people reach out, it's because communicating in their own style has, in their opinion, failed. I always do a risk assessment as to where they are in that communication stream just by talking with people and so forth. But I think, and almost every, I'm going to say a secret. I'm not always a big HR person because it used to mean something different for me. But every HR person, everyone that's in those types of resources, truly is looking for the information of how do we reach these people, and they're looking for those blueprints. It's the implementation I find to be challenging many times. To me, it's second nature. Like all of you and what you do, it's second nature. But most of the time is getting people to understand why, why do people behave this way? Can you see the outcomes of this versus how do I implement? Implementation is usually pretty easy with the right people. So the challenge is I spend probably more time than I anticipate explaining why people are different. Because, in the traditional business world, everybody's the same. We have leadership, we have hierarchy, we have HR to keep everybody in line. Boom, we should be successful. And it doesn't work that way.
No, I've had experience within an organization where the narrative, the vision, the way we communicate with each other, the words that we use, the acronyms, there was this familiarity about the whole thing across different teams.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like we were all kind of working together, going in the same direction, incredibly successful. And for me, that was a great experience.
Absolutely.
Other companies, there doesn't seem to be the order or
Mhm.
the framework, and it's more difficult. It seems more difficult. Feels like you're wading through treacle in some cases.
Absolutely. I mean, your original description is the perfect company. I would love to work for a company like that, where we're all going the same direction. We're all sailing the ship the same way. But what inevitably happens a lot nowadays, because companies come and go, we've got so many changes. Business is not the same as it was even 5 years ago, 3 years ago. Think of AI and everything, and everybody looking for shiny objects to look important and so forth. I think that's the challenge, is that everyone on a surface level knows we need to look a certain way. But when it gets down to the meat of it, we're all going different directions. You're rowing to the right and I'm rowing to the left because I think the left is much better than the right, but I'm not going to tell you that. And then you have leaders having those same types of issues, or working with people that just don't understand the vision. And that's part of strategic leadership, is casting that vision of, you operationally are doing the right thing today. You are rowing the boat all in the same direction. Good job. But we need to do more than row the boat. We need to have a strategic vision of where maybe we're adding sales to that boat. We're growing larger and bigger. And, here's how we're going to get there. And that eventually becomes that type of day-to-day leadership, as we move forward with more strategic leadership. It's a moving target, but it's a good moving target. And I think people don't get that. I think I see a lot, and I work a lot in technology and hospitals and healthcare, that we're all happy with the status quo. And status quo doesn't sit well for me. We don't change just because we change. We change to be strategically better. And I think that's what people are not seeing, is that when we're strategically changing to be better as a team, as an organization, we all start feeling that same momentum. And we actually go faster because now we're going downhill. We get the momentum behind us versus trying to row uphill or backwards from each other.
Is there, and I'm sort of playing this analogy through in my mind, but is there a certain size in which a company gets, and actually your method, your approach doesn't work, or is it just a case of growing the fleet?
Yeah, it's really growing the fleet as into multiple, think of it almost as pods within a company. Usually most of the organizations I work with are, Fortune 1000 and smaller. It gets harder as you go up in size, because then you think of it as an armada. So if you're a single captain on a ship, you know what you're doing, you're going the right direction, plundering the right people, hopefully not killing too many. But as you get bigger, you say, I want another ship, and then another. And that's how companies grow. They make an armada in the same direction. And it's hard sometimes without a single voice or the connectivity between the ships, being the business units at that time, of how do we maintain that common flow. So it gets harder as you get bigger. It's not impossible. You almost have to have people dedicated to that time. And it's not, and I hear the word dedicated in my own head. And people sometimes are like, oh, well, let's just make it fluff. Let's make it happy. Let's have, game night. I don't know, whatever it might be. And that's not what it is. It's understanding why the people are working for you to make you successful. And because really, without the individuals, no success. You might as well sink your ship now.
Where do we start? I mean, we want the easy button. We want the magic words.
Oh, where do we start? I think it's always identifying that there could be an issue. So unless you're an entrepreneur or a solopreneur, 1, 2, 3 people, you probably don't need to worry as much about it, because you're captain of your own little dinghy and you're going the direction you're going. But as you get bigger, I think there's a head knowledge that has to be accepted. I talk to a lot of companies. They're like, we're perfect. We've got everything great. But then you talk to the employees, they're like, not so much. Maybe I'm not so happy. And I think it's identifying the fact that we probably have a problem. And if we investigate it and there's not, good for us, but there's probably something. We're not talking to the generations correctly. We're not giving them proper motivation. So I always start by saying, identifying there's a problem. Next, look for where those problems are. I mean, I always like open and honest communication, but that's so rare nowadays. We all feel like we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings and, all the good things. And maybe it's too much of a pirate in me. It's like, I'd rather have you pull out a sword and attack me versus pull a knife in my back. So it's always being open and honest in that regard of working with the teams. I always start out in a small group too. So it may be in your organization. It's like, we got so many hot spots. There's no way we can do this. Why don't we just take a look at technology? Let's look at your technology team. How can we help them do better? And then put items in place to do it. I have a lot of frameworks and metaphors and such, depends on the organization. But, you know, that's just surface level stuff. It's having people envelop and understand it too. And it usually, good, bad, or indifferent, takes a couple of workshops and working with people. So I say, identify that you're probably doing something wrong, accept it, you know, move on with life. 2, find out what that wrong is, and then work to get that better in that communication style. It's too hard to do the entire organization at once unless you're an organization of 50. But I do think that you can start from an inward kind of movement to go forward. That's usually where I start.
Do organizations respond well to the pirate metaphor? because I think Steve Jobs what did he say? I'd rather be a pirate than a whatever he said. He would rather be a pirate.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, and all of us kind of feel that we are. Not all of us feel that we are. Many of us feel that we want to be that pirate. We want to be charting our own course. We want to be the little, you know, the David versus the Goliaths in the marketplace, that we want to go out and do our own thing. And this can be a very beguiling and compelling narrative to give people. But do they, and I'm thinking here about the life of Brian, and one of the do they kind of do they get into this idea of piracy and go, yeah, this is fantastic, and then go, what the hell am I doing? I'm an accountant.
Hey, we need pirate accountants. But no, I think you're right on the money there. I think conceptually there's a romantic feel with the idea of pirates. You know, we built it through our culture. We have movies about them. We have spoofs about them. We write books about them. And I think at first people are like, I love the idea. It's, you know, it fills a gap maybe. And the gap is, you know, I want to be an entrepreneur, but I don't know how to do it. So it fills that gap. But when you go to a business level, usually C-level love the idea of everyone doing better things. That's just what they do. And, you know, they're so busy. They're like, yeah, we love to do that. It's when you get down to the individual groups where I see a lot of resistance to change. Would be more like your HR, your culture type of individuals. And there's a challenge in saying, it goes back to the original thing. Is there a challenge to say that maybe we haven't done everything right? Doesn't mean it's bad. Not at all. We can't all be 100% perfect. And I'm nowhere near 100% perfect. I'd go toward the other end of the scale. But I think there's a challenge in people as a whole from a business perspective, accepting the pirate kind of metaphor. Individually, I see a lot more people kind of take that item and run with it. But once again, as you said, you know, I love the idea. I want to jump in, but how do I do it being an accountant? And it doesn't mean you can't, but it just means that it's giving you a foothold to jump off there. So yeah, from a business perspective, it can be a little more daunting to get everybody on board.
Yeah, and I think that there's one thing, me being convinced that I need to be a pirate, and something entirely different, everyone else being convinced that I need to be a pirate.
Right.
And I was speaking to a guy that I've known for a long time earlier this week, and he changed companies and went to work for another company, and he's kind of quite active on social. And he said, they hired me because I was different to what they were doing. So it would open doors that they otherwise couldn't open. Now, he's been in there 6 months, and Tim's laughing because he knows exactly where this is going. He's been in there 6 months, and they've said, actually, you're doing too much of this stuff. And he's like, what the hell are you talking about? This stuff is exactly why you hired me in the first place.
Right.
But they have become fearful of the very thing that they found attractive in him to begin with.
Exactly. And I've lived that life as well.
Yeah. So how does somebody maintain that? How does somebody convert the people that are less sure or are more conservative in the organization or organization to be braver with these initiatives?
No, I think that's a great idea, and it is a challenge. I personally experience that challenge probably every time I work with another client or I work for another organization. It's like, we love you, we love the idea. Now get in and fit with everybody else. It's like, fantastic, I love that. Usually it comes down because I've said earlier, I'm a very transparent person. So I love chatting with people and understanding what they liked and what they didn't like and why it's a challenge for them. And that sounds very simple, but usually that will tell me if it's going to be any change. Sometimes I found places where they've said, hey, we love you, we want you to make this change, you're the guy, and then now hush up and sit in the corner. When I used to live in Texas, we called it the person who used to sell roofing. So in Texas, there were many storms that would come by and your roof would get all torn up. Then a guy looks like me in a brand new white pickup truck, never been used before, with a ladder on back. It looks really good. Would come by and say, look, here's your price. And then you say, great, fix my roof. Now a completely different crew comes out that looks nothing like Don, an old beat up truck and everything. It's the art of surface level illusion. So they want people to say, hey, I wanted this person. I wanted Don in, and now I'm keeping him from other people as well, because he's kind of that linchpin to a catalyst of competition. So when I work with people up front, I just tell them, I'm who I am. If you're going to have to tell me not to do something versus me natively adhere to what you're doing. And I always let people know my philosophies ahead of time, because whoever hired me is not always the person I'm working with. So a lot of that comes down to the whole thing of, this is who I am, and if it doesn't work, I move on. I'm a pirate, and I have other ships that I can take over and be elected to be a captain on. But it is difficult, I'll admit that, because I struggle with that daily as well.
Don, this has been great. How can people get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So you can always go to my website, which is, believe it or not, drdonthomas.com. If you go there, you'll see articles, books, philosophies. There's, you can contact me from there. It's a single one-stop shop for everything Don and Pirates. So that would be the best way.
Excellent. So we now have a newsletter. Get show highlights, get beyond the show insights, and get alerts for upcoming episodes. You can scan the QR code on screen, or you can visit us at digitaldownload.live and click on the newsletter section. On behalf of the panelists, to our guest Don, to our audience, I want to thank you all for being an active part of today's show. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on the Digital Download.